The Galactic Empire did not arrive with fire in the sky or weapons blazing. They arrived with silence, inevitability, and arrogance. Their ships drifted into Earth's orbit like vultures, metallic predators poised against a prey they considered beneath them. Humanity had always been underestimated. The galaxy saw them as chaotic, unrefined, loud creatures who could never unite, who fought as much against each other as against their enemies. But the Empire made one fatal miscalculation. They believed they could take what they wanted from humans without consequence. They believed the price of theft would be silence. They did not understand that for humans, blood ties were not negotiable. On the northern fringes of a colony, 3 young girls were taken. They were not soldiers. They were not leaders. They were simply daughters, laughing only hours before in the safety of home. Imperial storm squads moved through the settlement with clinical efficiency, pushing aside resistance with precision fire and energy blades. The colonists shouted, resisted, bled, and fell. They were ignored, crushed beneath the weight of an empire that saw no value in individual life. For the soldiers, it was routine. A sweet. A harvest. Children loaded onto a transport, faces pale, eyes wide, cries muffled by the hum of containment fields. The ship rose into the sky and was gone, leaving behind burning roofs and shattered families most empires believed they could take and break without repercussion. They counted on fear. Fear was the tool that chained worlds. Fear was the reason countless species lay docile under imperial boots. But humanity had never been guided by fear. Grief, rage, defiance, those were their currencies. And when grief and rage burned inside the wrong person, the galaxy learned what kind of monsters humans could become. The abduction did not go unnoticed. The news carried quickly through smuggler channels, mercenary whispers, resistance bands. And every whisper carried a name. Baba Yaga. The name was not official. It was never spoken in the Empire's records. But soldiers in dark outposts muttered it when they drank, intelligence officers exchanged glances when the name surfaced in intercepted transmissions, mercenaries swore they'd never take contracts against her. She was a ghost, a myth, a story told to explain slaughtered squads and vanished fleets. Humans called her an operator, a survivor of wars the galaxy had never catalogued. Aliens called her a witch. But all understood one truth: when the name Baba Yaga surfaced, death followed. She had once been human like any other, flesh and blood, bound by laws and oaths. She had fought in wars, had bled in forgotten jungles and frozen wastelands, had carved her legend in operations the galaxy never recorded. And then she vanished. No one knew why. Some said she had grown tired of war. Some said she was hunted and forced into hiding. The truth was simpler. She had found something worth more than fighting. She had daughters. She had laid her weapons aside to give them peace. But peace had been stolen. When word reached her of the abduction, something in her shifted. 4 years she had walked as a shadow of who she once was, content to disappear. But with the loss of her girls, the shadow gave way to fire. The part of her the galaxy had feared was not dead. It had only been sleeping. And now it was awake. The Empire thought it had taken 3 helpless children. What it had taken was her blood. And for that crime, she would bring ruin. She was not alone in her wrath. Beside her was a creature, small to the untrained eye, yet infamous on Earth for its defiance of reason itself. The honey badger. It was not an ordinary animal. Generations of breeding, genetic splicing, and harsh training had turned it into something more. Its instincts were raw violence, its body a compact engine of destruction. Every predator feared it. Every prey envied its endurance. It had no sense of retreat. No sense of defeat. Plasma fire, blades, venom, traps, it ignored them all in the single-minded pursuit of tearing apart whatever stood before it. Baba Yaga called it her partner. The galaxy would come to know it as her executioner. The Empire laughed when they first heard rumors of her moving. Soldiers mocked the stories. Commanders dismissed the chatter. A woman and a beast meant nothing against dreadnoughts and legions. Yet beneath the arrogance, unease began to spread. Reports of stockpiles of weapons disappearing, of patrols vanishing without a trace, of signals cut off mid-scream. And in every whispered rumor, one detail remained the same: her oath. She would tear apart the stars if needed, one ship at a time, until she found her daughters. The galaxy had always feared humanity's capacity for violence, but it had dismissed it as undisciplined chaos. What it did not understand was the deeper truth: violence, for humans, was not random. It was adaptive. It was personal. Humans fought for reasons other species could not comprehend. For territory, for survival, for freedom, but most of all for family. A threat to blood was a threat that no human would forgive. And Baba Yaga was not an ordinary human. She was the embodiment of that principle. The first warnings came from smugglers who claimed to have seen her move through black markets, acquiring old war gear with quiet precision. She paid not with money, but with promises, threats, and favors that carried the weight of inevitability. Weapons once thought useless were reforged into instruments of slaughter. Scrap metal became mines. Chemicals became poisons. Every fragment of trash became a weapon in her hands. She needed no fleet. She needed no army. She was an army. The Empire's arrogance was its undoing. They dismissed her as one more rebel, a problem to be crushed when convenient. They failed to realize what was rising against them. The abducted daughters were not simply children. They were the trigger that pulled humanity's darkest instincts into the light. The Empire had dealt with human soldiers, with human colonies, with human diplomacy. But it had never dealt with one human mother who swore vengeance, and so the whispers grew. Mercenary captains abandoned imperial contracts, unwilling to hunt a woman whose legend included entire crews butchered in silence. Alien prisoners began to mutter prayers to her name, believing she was more than mortal. Imperial officers scoffed in public but carried unease in private. Every soldier understood that death was part of war. But the kind of death she brought was different. It was personal. It was intimate. She did not kill because she had to. She killed because someone had taken from her, and she would not stop until balance was restored. When her preparations were complete, when her partner snarled at her side and the first blood had been spilled, she sent a single message across the void. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a statement. They had taken her 3 girls. And she was coming for them. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as loud and reckless finally began to understand. Loudness was not the danger. Recklessness was not the threat. The true terror of humanity lay in the cold, calculated wrath of a single human who had been wronged, and as she moved into the darkness of space, shadows following, whispers echoing, the Empire felt the first chill of fear. Not of armies. Not of fleets. But of a story they had dismissed as myth. Baba Yaga was awake. And with her walked the killer honey badger. Together they were not soldiers. They were extinction wrapped in flesh. And the galaxy had no idea what storm had just been unleashed. The Empire's first mistake had been the abduction. The second was underestimating what would follow. They thought time would grind away her resolve, that exhaustion would sap her will, that the impossible odds would cage her like every other rebel before her. But Baba Yaga was not like every other rebel. She was not fighting for ideology or freedom or resources. She was fighting for blood, for her children, and that was the kind of war humanity never lost. Her first strike came without fanfare. A convoy of supply vessels, lightly guarded, routine, easy. They expected no resistance. They did not see the mines drifting in silence until it was too late. They did not see the improvised explosives hidden in scrap containers until the detonation tore through their hulls. They did not understand how one human had penetrated their communication codes until the survivors broadcasted pleas into the void that went unanswered. When Imperial reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left but twisted wreckage and silence. A single message was carved into the drifting metal. Return what you took. At first, commanders laughed. They called it terrorism. They labeled her as an insignificant outlaw, one who could be silenced with enough force. But silence did not come. Another patrol vanished. A listening post went dark. A frigate reported boarding alarms before its signals were cut, and when the wreck was later found, every officer lay executed with precision shots, every system scuttled, every database wiped clean. Only one thing remained on the ship, the crest of a honey badger clawing through steel. Fear began to spread not because of the scale of her strikes, but because of their precision. She did not waste energy. She did not strike blindly. She hunted. Every attack was targeted. Every kill deliberate. She was not a rebellion. She was not an uprising. She was a scalpel carving at the arteries of the Empire. And her legend grew with every drop of blood spilled. The honey badger, her companion, became just as feared. The first confirmed sighting came when an Imperial laboratory, locked down with biocontainment and guarded by elite soldiers, was breached. The alarms blared, doors sealed, weapons unleashed. Yet nothing stopped it. The animal moved like fury incarnate, clawing, tearing, ignoring wounds that should have killed it. Plasma fire scorched its hide, blades cut into its flesh, but it fought until the soldiers fell screaming. Security feeds captured its approach, its eyes wild with rage, its body low to the ground as it tore armored troopers apart. Those who saw the footage swore no beast could survive such punishment, yet it had. The lab burned, its research destroyed, its commanders found dead, their throats ripped out. Soldiers began whispering of the creature that could not die. Every strike carried a psychological wound deeper than the physical one. The Empire had always ruled by fear. Entire species submitted because the cost of resistance was annihilation. But for the first time, soldiers of the Empire were afraid not of being ordered to fight, but of being ordered to face her. She did not wage war with honor or ceremony. She waged war with ruthlessness. She poisoned water supplies meant for fleets. She suffocated crews by venting atmosphere in surgical precision. She used the wreckage of destroyed ships as bait, turning rescue missions into massacres. She stripped survivors of dignity, marking them with scars that carried her symbol, sending them back alive to tell others what awaited them. She was not only fighting the Empire, she was dismantling its soul. The higher ranks responded with escalation. Elite hunters were dispatched, augmented assassins trained to kill in silence, cybernetic warriors bred for nothing but death. They were sent with confidence. They were sent with resources. And one by one, they vanished. Some never returned. Others were found in pieces, their enhancements turned into trophies. A few managed to send final transmissions before being cut off, transmissions filled with the sounds of shrieking, snarling, and gunfire before silence. The Empire could no longer deny it. They were facing something they could not quantify, something they could not command their soldiers to confront without hesitation. The honey badger was not the only tool in her arsenal. She adapted every encounter into a lesson. When an Imperial trap nearly ended her, she memorized their strategies and reversed them. When they used overwhelming firepower, she forced them into close quarters where their numbers meant nothing. When they tried to predict her movements, she shifted her tactics, abandoning reason, fighting like chaos itself. She became unpredictable, and unpredictability was more terrifying than power. A fleet could be fought. A weapon could be countered. But a mind that never fought the same way twice became a storm that no one could prepare for, the galaxy noticed. Smugglers who had once avoided humans now aligned with her, not out of loyalty, but out of survival. Rebellion cells on subjugated worlds took her strikes as inspiration, igniting their own acts of defiance. Some whispered that she was more than human, that she was a ghost of vengeance, a spirit of death that the galaxy itself had birthed to punish the arrogant. And in dark corners of cantinas and bunkers, even alien children whispered her name with awe and fear, believing that she would come for anyone who dared harm the innocent. Imperial Command tried propaganda. They broadcasted her as a criminal, as a deranged woman who used animals and terror instead of honor. They tried to paint her as weak, desperate, insane. But the propaganda backfired. For every lie they spread, another wrecked convoy proved the opposite. For every declaration of victory, another officer disappeared. Soldiers began to distrust their leaders, questioning why their superiors told them not to fear someone who was clearly unstoppable. Fear corroded discipline. Morale disintegrated. The Empire's most powerful weapon, the belief in its inevitability, was breaking. As the war spread, patterns emerged. Her strikes were not random. She was moving steadily closer to the heart of the Imperial prison network. Each supply line severed, each laboratory destroyed, each patrol silenced, all of it carved a path toward one place, where her daughters were held. Commanders realized it too late. She was not waging war for the sake of war. She was hunting with purpose, dismantling the Empire piece by piece, step by step, until nothing stood between her and the blood they had stolen from her. Entire sectors began to collapse under the pressure. Soldiers mutinied rather than face her. Crews abandoned ships mid-flight, escaping in lifepods and leaving their vessels adrift. Colonies whispered prayers to her instead of pledging loyalty to the throne. The Empire had always stood as an unbreakable monolith, a machine of conquest that devoured resistance. But Baba Yaga was not resisting. She was dismantling. And the honey badger tore through the cracks she opened, turning every wound into carnage. The most chilling reports were not of battles, but of the aftermath. Ships found drifting with no life aboard, their crews vanished without explanation. Bases left silent, lights flickering, hulls painted with blood but no bodies. Officers executed and displayed with cold precision, warnings carved into their armor. Survivors spoke of whispers in the dark, of footsteps echoing in silence, of snarls in the air before their comrades vanished. She was not only killing them, she was teaching them to fear shadows, teaching them to doubt every corner, every sound, every silence. By the time Imperial Command admitted they had lost control, it was too late. Their empire of fear had met a greater terror, and it wore the face of a human mother and the claws of a beast that refused to die. Her strikes grew bolder, her reach wider, her legend larger. What began as isolated attacks had become an unraveling of the Empire's spine. The soldiers stopped laughing. The commanders stopped mocking. And whispers turned into desperate prayers that they would never hear her footsteps in the dark. The Empire had taken her daughters. And now, the Empire itself was beginning to understand what that mistake would cost. The Empire had built its throne on the certainty that no one could reach its heart. Worlds bent because resistance seemed futile, because no single enemy could ever breach the layers of defenses, fortresses, and fleets. That certainty had been its shield. Now that shield was shattering. Baba Yaga was no longer a rumor whispered in back alleys or among terrified soldiers. She was a force recognized by the galaxy. Entire sectors where Imperial banners once flew had gone silent, not because they were liberated, but because no commander dared raise their flag under the threat of her shadow. The path she carved was not a campaign, it was a reckoning. And the heart of that path led to the black sites where the three daughters were caged. Every strike, every body, every shattered fleet had been preparation for this moment. She did not care about the wealth of the Empire, its planets, its resources, or its politics. She cared about the prison that held her blood. The Empire had thought to use the children as bait. They believed her love would make her reckless, that it would pull her into traps where her vengeance could be extinguished. They believed sentiment was weakness. But they had miscalculated, because human love was not a leash, it was fuel. It was the fire that burned armies, the fury that turned restraint into annihilation. Her love had not weakened her. It had made her unstoppable. The closer she drew to the black sites, the greater the desperation of Imperial command. They abandoned subtlety and threw fleets at her, hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers. Every battle was meant to be her end, yet every battle left them diminished, bleeding, broken. She did not destroy with overwhelming strength. She dismantled with precision, striking weaknesses no one should have known, turning the Empire's own arrogance against it. She weaponized the chaos of combat, used her honey badger as shock incarnate, and ensured survivors carried the terror of what they had faced. Her war was never measured in territory gained, but in morale lost. And by the time she stood at the gates of the prison network, morale was a corpse. The prison was not one station but a labyrinth of them, linked by fortified corridors of space, defended by super dreadnoughts, armed with technologies meant to erase entire fleets. It was here the Empire stored its most dangerous captives, and here they believed her daughters would break her. They had been subjected to confinement, fear, and experiments designed to study the resilience of human offspring. The Empire's scientists wanted to know what made humanity unyielding. They wanted to dissect it, control it, reduce it to numbers. What they failed to realize was that the more they pressed, the more fuel they poured into the fire of Baba Yaga's wrath. She breached the outer defenses not by brute force but by unraveling them from within. Systems shut down at the wrong time, codes corrupted, supplies sabotaged. By the time the alarm was raised, her presence was already deep inside, her honey badger ripping through shock troops with ferocity that left hardened veterans trembling. Plasma rounds tore the air, explosions shook the corridors, but nothing slowed the advance. She carved her way through walls of steel and bodies of flesh alike, leaving behind only silence and ruin. For the Empire, the prison had been a symbol of control. For her, it was nothing but an obstacle between a mother and her children. When she found them, locked within containment fields and scarred by the cruelty of their captors, there was no hesitation. The girls were weak, but alive, and in that moment, the Empire's gambit ended. They had thought holding her blood gave them power. Instead, it signed their death warrant. The soldiers guarding the chamber did not survive long enough to realize what was happening. The scientists who had taken notes on human resilience were left with no time to burn their research. The Empire had sought to learn what drove humanity. They received their answer in fire and blood. Retrieving her daughters was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the final lesson. The Empire had always justified its conquests with logic, with efficiency, with the cold machinery of order. But what faced them now was not order. It was vengeance. She tore through their command structures, executed their leaders with precision, and left their fleets burning in orbit. She gave no speeches, no negotiations, no ultimatums. She did not bargain with tyrants. She did not parley with monsters. Every officer she captured was dealt with swiftly. Every general who signed the orders for her daughter's abduction was erased without mercy. She did not once surrender. She wanted them broken. The honey badger became the nightmare at the center of every encounter. Soldiers threw entire barges of firepower at it, only to watch it advance without pause, a blur of fury and claws. The beast was indestructible not because it could not be killed, but because it refused to die before its work was done. It was humanity distilled into an animal, fearless, relentless, unstoppable. It was the living metaphor of her war, and the sight of it charging through firestorms was enough to turn elite troops into cowards. The Empire's finest weapons could not break it, and in its shadow, every soldier knew the truth. There was no defense against something that refused to yield. The collapse of the prison network triggered ripples across the galaxy. Worlds that had been silent rose in rebellion. Species long enslaved seized the moment. The fear of the Empire evaporated, replaced by something new, the fear of provoking humanity. Baba Yaga's actions spread not just through official channels but through whispered stories, exaggerated in some places, understated in others, but always carrying the same core truth: one human had brought an empire to its knees. And she had done it not with armies or fleets, but with will, rage, and a beast at her side. When she finally stood before the remnants of the Empire's high command, there was no hesitation. They offered explanations, excuses, bargains. They pleaded for order, for mercy, for understanding. She gave none. She was not there for politics. She was there for retribution. And retribution was absolute. In that chamber, as commanders fell one by one, the galaxy's balance of power shifted forever. The Empire had learned the most dangerous truth in the universe: humans could forgive insults, could endure hardship, could even tolerate oppression. But the moment someone touched their blood, their family, their children, there was no force in existence capable of stopping what came next. Her daughters lived. The honey badger lived. She did not remain to rule the ruins she left behind. She was not a conqueror. She was not a politician. She was a mother who had completed her mission. The Empire was fractured, its fleets scattered, its credibility destroyed. And the lesson it left behind echoed louder than any proclamation: never provoke humanity at its core. For other species, survival was instinct. For humans, survival was vengeance. Whispers of her continued long after she disappeared again into the shadows. To some, she became myth. To others, warning. Parents told their children to behave, or Baba Yaga would come for them. Soldiers muttered her name in fear when boarding missions went wrong. And in every corner of the galaxy, the story remained: the Empire had taken 3 girls, and in return, Baba Yaga came with her killer honey badger, and the galaxy itself burned for it.